So before I do that, like the guy says, before I make a speech, I want to say a few words. He says, before I show you what we have for tonight, I felt guilty. Felt bad that we had a glitch last week in the Salah Shabbat, and now we got it down right. So let me just give it an immediate background, and we'll just right into it. I told you last week about the difficulties of what they call klita, mizug, trying to create an Israeli culture in which is not one against the other. However, there was a certain amount, quite a bit of cultural imperialism involved, because basically what the Ashkenazim said is, why don't you yield to the Israeli culture, which is ours? And this is a famous, well-known theme. Ben Gurion was all in favor of everybody amalgamating into his culture, and nobody can explain or give for an audience like this a more vivid idea than this passage that you're going to see a several minutes passage from Salah Shabbat, where, as I mentioned last week, the two lovers want to get married. The boy from the kibbutz is Ashkenazi, and the daughter of Salah, who's Sephardi. That's not the problem. The problem is the father, in order to get housing, needs $800 or 800 lira at that time, and the kibbutz won't pay because this is a barbaric, right? You don't pay for a bride, and but where he comes from, they do. And is he a barbarian? Is she a barbarian? Do both of them have the same kind of tunnel vision? But I can't do it as well as Ephraim Kishon, who wrote this, so let's start with that. He's leaving the kibbutz because they won't pay for the bride. These are the two bosses of the kibbutz.
למה? כפי שהבנתי מדבריו של חבר זיקי, אתה דורש אני מוכר חבובה כמו סוסני. בשביל 800 לירה אפשר לקבל סוסה, אפשר? גברת יודעת כמה עולה סוסה כמה? סוסה זה קטנה, שאלה עולה 2,000. בטח אפשר לקבל אישה גם בשביל 50 לירה. אישה קטנה, כמו הגברת חבר. לא חבר.
אדוני היקר, תגננו בו, זה מעבר כל גבול. מה שכחתי, היקר? אתם יוצאי עדות המזרח. עם כל הכבוד שאנחנו רוחשים לכם, עליכם להשתדל להתרגל למציאות ארצנו המתקדמת. ולשכוח מהר טובה מנהגים הברבריים שלכם שהבאתם איתכם משם.
לשכוח? למה לשכוח? אתם תמיד רוצים, אנחנו שוכחים השיר הטוב בשבילכם. תגיד לנו, אם יש אצלנו למשל מנהג המילה הזאת, מנהג כזה שהאבא נותן 1,000 לירה בשביל שהבת שלו תתחתן בקיבוץ. גם כן אתם אומרים לנו לשכוח זה? זה לא. אתם אומרים לנו לשכוח רק מה שלא טוב בשבילכם. הוא בנה מוסיעה, זה לא טוב. למה? למה אדון וגברת אוכלים רק שניצל כל היום? שירים יפים. שירים יפים, קומות שמרגפת, ידינו חי בידינו, זה לא טוב. למה סמכוני על המינור, כל היום ברדיו, שאפשר להשתגע עד זה טוב. למה? למה אדון וגברת שומעים זה, רק זה, כל השנים, משהים קטנים, רק זה. עכשיו כבר לא יודעים מה טוב. ברבר לא ברבר. אצלנו משלמים לאבא בשביל שהוא מגדל היותר שלו כל השנים בשביל אדון זיגי. אצלכם פה בקיבוץ עם זועים, לא רוצים לקצור אחר כך? חלאס. לא צריך שום דבר. אדון זיגי, אני רציתי הכסף בשביל שיקום. אבל עכשיו כבר לא צריך. אני רואה, אתם מדברים הרבה, אבל האמת שאתם עניים יותר מעזרה סוציאלית. לא צריך שום דבר. אני אגיד לך את האמת, אדון זיג. אני יכול לקבל בשביל חבובה 800 לירה, 800, מנהג אוטובוס אחד בין-עירוני מאוד. אבל חבובה לא אוהבת אותו בשביל שהוא שמן. לא צריך שום דבר. לא צריך. סלח שבת נותן החבובה שלו בשביל אדון זיגי בלי כסף. מה שבת? תודה רבה. סלח שבת לא לוקח כסף מעניים.
אני
שום נהג שמן אינו עולה החבר קיבוץ ותיק. עולה ותיק, מה חשוב? אין כסף, אז אין כסף.
אתה אל תעשה לנו סוכנות. אתה תקבל את כספך עד התוצאה האחרונה.
אז אתם בכל זאת רוצים לשלם לי? כן. טוב, אם כולם אמרו, אני לא קיבל.
All right. Now he said that in a that's a humorous way, but you get the point I'm trying to make, which is how do you create a national culture? You drop all your stuff and do it the way I do it, right? You know, it's the classic thing when they get married. Each one says, "Why don't you become normalized to my ways?" Okay, as I said tonight, I want to. We'll return to that movie in another context in a little while, I hope. But the years of 1949-52, 49-52, those years right after the Independence War, were transformative years for Orthodox Judaism in general and in Israel in particular. Until then, really until then, Orthodox Judaism was going down. That's just the way it was. And it was a decadent phase. And I'm talking about Eretz Yisrael now. And what I mean by that is more and more there was a hemorrhaging of the religious Jews, especially the young people, into the Chiloni, Zionist world in general. Here's a poster boy for what I'm talking about. Reuben Shilach, one of the most important people in Israel. He was like Ben-Gurion's number 2 or 3 deputy for national security affairs. He created the Mossad, for example. He was in a lot of spy stuff. Now, he's a very important high official in the Israeli government. He was born in Shmei Sharm. His father was Rosh Yeshiva, Zaslansky. They changed the name when he became Reuben Shiloach. But I just picked one. He's emblematic of a generation in which they didn't want to live in Mea Shearim places or Bnei Brak places or the equivalent elsewhere. They wanted to get out in the quote-unquote real world, and the way to do that was to enlist in the Zionist struggle or something like that. I mean, you know, so this is the way it went. All during the British occupation, I didn't like to talk about this, all during British occupation, girls from Mea Shearim families would run off with British soldiers. There's still some of them, well, it's a long time now, but for many of them, what do you call it? They got married to a sergeant, to a corporal, girls from Chashuva families, you know. But it happens because Orthodoxy was in a decadent, phase at that time, and it's terrible. You know, I remember reading about 2 or 3 of them. One lives in Wales, one lives in Scotland on a little farm. It's not like they married the Duke of Edinburgh or something like that. And it's symptomatic of the times. Pre-48, on the other hand, you know, one going up, one going down. Pre-48 were the golden years of cultural Zionism. Hence, they're the nadir of Orthodox Judaism. The culture that seemed like it has a future was the hoped for, perhaps utopian, new state in which everything will be great. And that's the part you want to get involved in. And yet, there are differences. What's happening in Palestine at that time is not the same thing as happened in America. In America, and the West in general, as orthodoxy, I'm using that term, I mean that's a later term, orthodoxy went down, new movements like conservative reform popped up to suck in everybody. And so, you don't need me to tell you, the conservative Judaism, which was founded around in America was founded around 1900 or so, totally took people who were abandoning orthodoxy. It wasn't interesting for them anymore. And this created a kind of a permanent reality, so that even when conservative Judaism shot its bolt about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, once you're in that framework, you're in that framework. Reform Judaism the same way. In Palestine, there is no real conservative or Reform Judaism. There's religious Judaism and secular Judaism, which is something different. Most people don't get that. It's an East European thing versus a Central and Western European thing. In Western Europe, including Germany, the Reform movement arose in the 19th century. Conservative, they had different names, and this caused all these bitter fights, you know, in the communities. And as we know, Samson Raphael Hirsch and people like that said, you're not allowed to be in the same community with these other people. This was a big fight in Germany, as I'm sure you know. But let's see the next picture here. Yeah, I mean, there's a first. Oh, this is the grandson, but it doesn't matter. His father, anyway, was a successor of him, and this was the Austritt-Gemeinde, which means you Austritt, you walk out. That they felt that it's theologically objectionable to be in any kind of organizational framework together with Jews who reject fundamentalism. You understand? And Hirsch is famous. A lot of rabbis in Germany agreed, a lot didn't agree. For these two people, go to the next one. These were two famous rabbis also who were Orthodox, and were in Frankfurt actually, and they said, no, you're not supposed to break away. Kol Yisrael Chaverim. We argue within the family, and so what's called Einheitsgemeinde. It should be Einheit, a unified community. And everybody will pay taxes to it, and we'll work out in a respectful way, in the American style, and hopefully in a respectful way that everybody's needs should be taken care of, and no one will tread on anybody's feet. But Hungary, as a phenomenon in the 19th and early 20th century, and many places in Germany and Austria, but Hungary is the most famous for this. We said, no, that the Orthodox should set up an entirely parallel network of institutions precisely to indicate their non-recognition and their non-association with the rest of the Jewish community. And that's because the ideological struggles over reform and conservative things like this led to ideological and theological reactions. But in Eastern Europe, this never happened. There never arose a conservative Judaism in Russian Empire and Poland. That's a factor of huge importance. The reason it didn't happen was because conservatism and reform were products of the first half of the 19th century. And the desire in Germany originally and elsewhere to sort of bourgeois, to become middle class like everyone else, and they wanted what we would call respectable Judaism, right? The Orthodox was viewed as being not respectable. And therefore, that's the sociological grounds upon which it was built. This didn't exist in Tsarist Russia. By the time you get to the middle of the 19th century, you're talking Charles Darwin already. Nobody's interested in a liberal religion. They say the heck with all religion altogether. You get it? Well, because that's what science teaches. And so the result is that you have a different type of split among those types of people. What we call today chilonim, it's just secular. But that leaves the question, what is secular Judaism? What is that? Which is a good question and something that they, discuss and debate down till today, because there's no real exact answer for that. And in the course of all this, maybe I'm fighting this cold here, but in the course of all this, what emerged was, I'm a secularist, I'm indifferent to religion. Am I an atheist? If you follow Darwin and the other guys, you are. But if not, it doesn't matter. You know one thing, you're not a fundamentalist. And you don't buy into all this religion stuff. But if you wish to, that's your business. And the result is that all throughout Eastern Europe, not Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, those places, this is the Tsarist Russian Empire for the most part. The fear of the Goyim, of the government, the Tsars of Russia, very powerful over the community. The traditional Jewish feelings that we got to hang together because we have nobody else we can rely upon except ourselves. At the end of the day, it's us. So, Joseph and the brothers patch up the quarrel. That kind of feeling, plus the circumstance that I just said, that no one offered an alternative version of the Jewish religion, led to an interesting situation, and that is that the communities were sometimes majority or dominated very often by secular Jews, but they made a place at the table because they felt they just had to culturally for the religious Jews in order to handle just the religious stuff in the communities. And that's the way it works. It was a very interesting period, obviously. We talk about the 1800s and early 1900s in the Russian Empire, but there were elections in all the kehillas, and you restricted franchise, but there was election in all the kehillas. And the model that emerged was exactly what you see in Israel today, which is you have the right wingers, you have this wingers, that wingers. I'll just give you an example off the top of my head. You take a town like a place, Vilna or something like that. By the time you get to 1900, 1910 certainly, and after 1920s and 30s, how many Jews in the community? 50,000, 100,000, a lot of Jews. Describe them. Most of them will be Zionist. Some will be Bundist and other forms of anti-Zionism and nevertheless secular. Many will be religious as well. So here comes the annual elections in the community. And let's say, for argument's sake, there's a board of directors of 100 people or 50 people or something like that. So it's going to be that everybody will vote, and then they'll divvy it up based on the percentages, is the way they do in Israel. So in Vilna, you'd say, the socialist Zionists got 23%, and the Bundists got 18%, and the territorialists, for example, another form, they got 7%, and this one got 10%, and all that. And the religious parties, immediately there's always a break. There's Aguda or Mizrahi, So this one will get so many percent, so many percent. And then when the elections are over, what do you find? Almost always, the religious party is a minority. So it's not like they're going to take over the community and run the budget, because we're talking of a budget of several $1 million. And so what happens is that there's a lot of horse trading and bargaining behind closed doors, the way it happens in every city government in America. Not Baltimore, we're perfect, but everywhere else. But And then, deals are made, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's called politics. I don't mean in a bad way. And so what always emerges in Eastern Europe is like this. The general Zionists, they'll be in charge of the Treasury Department, so to speak. Right? It'll usually be some doctor or professional guy doing that. And, the socialist Zionists, they'll be in charge of running the Kehillah's welfare program. You see? And another group of Zionists, a progressive, whatever, will be in charge of dealing with the city and the state. And what about the religious party? You'd be in charge of religious affairs. What are religious affairs? As far as the Kehillah is concerned, officially with the money, the Associated Jewish Charities. What is religious affairs? And the mikveh, the cemetery, the synagogue, hiring the rabbi or the dayan and that sort of thing. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, it's not a marginalization exactly, but it's assigning the religious to a very specific role. And the idea being like this. The rest of us don't care that much, if you want to say Tachnun on this day or don't say Tachnun on that. That's for me the Religious Affairs Committee. But at the same time, you'll be part of the coalition that runs the city, and so when we need to raise taxes, you'll be part of that process, and therefore your followers are all supposed to go with the tax increase. Or if we have some kind of particular stance we have to adopt vis-a-vis the government, then you'll be part of that. You see what I'm saying? Before Israel started, you already had the Knesset and everything like that. That's it, and that comes out of the Eastern European tradition. It didn't occur, almost never, but with the rarest of exceptions, it didn't occur in the Russian Empire that the religious should say, since we're sitting with people who don't even believe in God, stay away from them, and we should demonstrate our non-recognition of the legitimacy of the rulers of the community by refusing to participate in the election. They never did that. Their own constituency wouldn't want that. And rather they said, listen, a perfect world would be everybody's religious. A less perfect world would be where some are, some aren't, but we're all Jews. Kol Yisrael Chaverim, literally. And the communitarian dynamic was extremely powerful. And the fact that you have all these pogroms and things going on outside only reinforces that. And so, let's fight cats and dogs behind the doors. But as far as the public is concerned, we have to show ourselves be united. Keep that distinction in mind between Eastern Europe on the one hand and Central Western Europe on the other hand, where you have the Hirschian kind of arguments about you have to break out of the community and separate and do your own thing. The voters, by the way, in Eastern Europe don't simply follow the Gedolim. I mean, the religious parties never win the election, very rarely, I should say, over here. The best example of what I'm talking about is the famous movement Chovevei Tzion, which only makes sense in Russia and would never happen in Germany. Hey, let's go over here. You've heard of the Netziv, and you heard of the Yitzhak Khan Inspector. These are the two leading rabbis ever, but certainly in Russia in the 19th century. The Netziv of Volozhin, let's go. And Rabbi Yitzhak Khan was the man. And they're both card-carrying members of the Chovevei Tzion. Now, dues-paying card-carrying members of the Chovevei Tzion. Now, the Chovevei Tzion is before Herzl, but it's a kind of a Zionist movement. And the most important part is that the leader is this guy who's not only not Shomer Shabbos, I mean, is beyond assimilated. That's why he writes a famous tract in early Zionism, Self-Emancipation, Auto-Emancipation in Germany, right? Now, he was a distinguished physician, but he was very anti-Orthodox and that sort of business. And could you imagine today that a Rosh Hashiva or something like this would join an organization who these guys elected, participating in electing him to be the head of the organization? The idea, of course, being like this. Oh, Chovevei Tzion, you have to deal with the government, you have to deal with Turkey, Rabbi, get somebody who can speak European languages and has an education and so on and so forth. And it's an extremely Russian phenomenon, right? Extremely Eastern European phenomenon. It's inconceivable in a place like Frankfurt or whatever. And this is the poster boys of what I'm talking about. When Herzl comes along in 1895, 1897, and he founds political Zionism, one of the things he does is, he gets a lot of criticism, and one of the things he does is he says, I'm adopting the slogan Kibush HaKehilot, which means we have to conquer all the communities. Nothing wrong with that in the sense it's not an underhanded kind of a movement. He says, I want Zionists in every town in Europe to organize themselves politically within the process and contest the Kehillah elections. And so we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that the Rosh HaKol or this or that, the people on the board of directors of the different kehillas will be Zionists one or another, and they are successful, right? Not everywhere, not all the time, but overall, they're successful. The success of the Zionist parties in these kehillah elections really goes down to the Holocaust, when everybody's killed. Now, by the way, the Bund also had a lot of successes over there. This, understandably, freaked out the religious, because all of a sudden you're not talking about, the danger of heresy out there. It's the rabbi looks around and he says, everybody in my community voted for the socialists, for the Mapai, as we would say today. You're like, what's going on over here? And the result is, in the early 1900s, that the religious formed their own political party as a reaction to what I'm talking about. That's how the Mizrahi was founded within the Zionist movement itself in 1902. That's how the Aguda is founded as a non-Zionist, obviously, and sort of an alternative model, but it's officially, the Aguda was formed exactly as a counter model to the Zionist, or a mirror image, if you want, of the World Zionist Organization. But, the claims that the Aguda gives is grandiose. I mean, they say, we represent the mass of the Jews and all this sort of thing. And they don't get any traction. I mean, let's look over here. I mean, you all heard of Chaim Weizmann, and this is Rabbi Yaakov Rosenheim, who was the political director of the Aguda. This is the guy that got the Balfour Declaration, not him. You see, this is the guy, if he wants to get in the White House, he can make a phone call. Or if he wants to see the King of England, and not him. Why not? He's the leader of a worldwide organization of religious Jews. The Aguda doesn't get the traction. The Zionists who immigrated into Palestine in 1920 to 1948, notice after the Balfour Declaration, are overwhelmingly East European, and they unconsciously and naturally import Eastern European norms into Jewish politics. You understand? I'm trying to show you, if I said to you Israel is a shtetl writ large, it would sound like a witty remark about it. No, it's kind of true. The whole Yishuv, after all, was one big kehillah. And, how does the politics work in Palestine in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s? There are elections every once in a while for the Zionist parliament. It was under the British, but they had their internal, like a Knesset, as we would say today. Maybe you don't know that, but right away in 1920, 21, the Zionists, the Yishuv as they call it, with British permission, set up their own little state within the state. And they took care of all the social stuff. So the British don't supply any schooling. The Jews build their own schools. The British don't supply any hospitals or things. The Jews build their own Kupat Chalim. And the British don't pay for building kibbutzim and moshavim and things like that. The Jews, as you know, will do that on their own. But how does that process work? Who's the Jews? There will be some kind of elections. It's as fair and honest as the elections in Baltimore, Chicago, or anywhere else in the world. And it's within that framework that the budgets and the real stuff is happening over there. And what happens on 1920s, 30s, and 40s is that the religious parties are assigned the role that I just told you. Take care of the mikvahs and the cemeteries and providing Hebrew services and things of this nature. But the other stuff leave to Ben Gurion. You understand? I mean, that's basically the idea. Now, by the way, let me make a point over here. It used to be called the Minhelet Am and the Knesset Am and all kind of names like this. They had a state within a state. But ruling Palestine was Britain at that time, for those 30 years. They're the ones who actually have political control. What you're talking about over here is the Zionists' design or intention to create as I say, a parliament within the parliament. There's a mini parliament that will serve as democratic society under the British rubric. The British are the ones that really have the power. The reason I'm saying that is, so if you're an Aguda member at that time, you really don't vote in these things, because the Aguda takes the position, which is a Hersheyan one, which is that we don't recognize the Zionist movement as representing the masses of Jews in Israel, and even if they did, it's illegitimate. And therefore, in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, groups like the Aguda really live a separatist kind of life. And you can do it because the whole Yishuv is a kind of a play. You pay your taxes really to the British. They're the ones who are really in charge. So if you want to join the play and get involved in the rah-rah of Zionist life and politics, you can. But if you don't want to, it doesn't matter either. But, you just live your life wherever you live it. This is going to change, as you know, when Israel becomes a state. The one last point, to the religious, from especially, political Zionism was not that big of a deal. I know it's big to Satmar and all that, but that wasn't a big deal to the Aguda types, as you would say at that time, for the most part. So political Zionism, even Herzl's time, was not that controversial. But cultural Zionism sure was. To them, it's poison. So there's a difference between... You don't have it? Okay. There's a difference between Herzl on the one hand and Ahad Ha'am on the other. Herzl, as you know, was an assimilated Jew, didn't know anything. And the Frum liked that. They said, he's not going to tell us how to run Judaism. It means that you'll have, along the lines of what I'm saying over here, the Jewish religion is recognized as being orthodox. The classic line, that's the shul I don't daven in. But you acknowledge that there's only one correct way of doing Judaism, except that we're post-religious, secularists would say. You understand? As opposed to saying, why do you say your Judaism is right? This one is a liberal Jew, a Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist, this, that, and the other. If I want to, redefine Judaism in any particular way, who's going to stop me? If that had arisen, it would have been a problem. But since you're talking about Palestine in the time I'm talking about, it's either Frum or Fry, as they used to call it in those days. And the result is that there's a stake. You can participate directly or indirectly in Zionism, as we'll see. But cultural Zionism was Ahad Ha'am's whole approach. And Weitzman was a big disciple of his. And that is that you say, no, Zionism is mainly about, and ought to be about, the reconstruction of Judaism, and I mean literally, the redefinition of Judaism. If I'm Jewish and I consider myself a good Jew and I don't believe in God, then how do I define good Jew? Ahad Ha'am says that's the question of all questions. And we have to work on creating a secularist kind of answer to that. What I mean, really reinventing Judaism. So, for example, he says it's a nationality, not a religion. Obviously, he knows it was a religion too, but he's saying in its inner core, Judaism has always been a nationality. I don't want to go through all those details I've done in the past. This was real poison because what you're doing is you're not saying like this, there's one way of doing the religion and then the rest of us we just don't go to shul. You're saying that religion itself has to be destroyed almost and replaced by a better model of what Judaism is if it is to survive. You can understand to Orthodox Jews that was poison. And it was in opposition to Ahad Ha'am and his followers who were gaining a very strong position in the Zionist movement back in 1900, in 1902, that the Mizrahi Party was formed in the first place. You understand? The rabbis who founded the Mizrahi Party were big rabbis in Russia and all the rest of it, but they really were worried about the fact that the movement's going to take over, the cultural Zionists, not the political Zionists, are going to take over the movement, and then they're going to spread kfira in all the different places in Russia and in Poland, which of course they did. So the Mizrahi has to be understood in this kind of a context. In the rest of the world, the religious Zionists had their big years precisely in the context that I'm speaking about, in reaction to the other Zionists, to try to show a Zionism which has a religious face, and of course based on all the Jewish traditions, as we know. You don't have to come up, if you're a religious Zionist, you don't have to come up with the whole theory of why we're interested in Palestine and what kind of a home we're going to build or all the rest. The program's already written long ago. This particular kind of notion really was very popular in Europe and in America particularly, before 1948. And I always like to show this picture. There's Bialik, of course. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, that's Rabbi Samson, right? And that's one of the graduating teams. Thank you. Not right now. He says one of the graduating classes in 1940 or so. I'm sure some of your relatives are on there. But first of all, everybody's got a hat, and they're not black hats. That's first of all. No, I'm serious. And second of all, this was, I know some of these people, maybe one or two are here, but this was a period in which TA was basically a Mizrahi place. You understand? Schools like that all across the whatever day schools there were there. You know and I know. It became part of the absolute culture, maybe still is, I don't know, that you sing Hatikva at the banquet. Like, what's that? You see, where'd that come up? This is splendid. In other words, the idea of a religious Zionism was very popular and appealed to wide ranges of people during this period. I mean, near Israel also. The Mizrahi could claim that they had a program. See, that was their big pull. Building up Eretz Israel as Zionists and taking care to guard the religious definition of Judaism as fundamentalist and nomian. You're based on the belief of God and the Torah and all that, and that you have to follow the din. This is a program that a young person can, if you're from, can identify with. And what are you doing to help Jewish life? I'm helping to build Israel. I'm sending money, or having a banquet or something like that. But we're doing stuff to go Israel. The Agudah during these years is constantly criticizing the Mizrahi as sellouts, because what they mean is that in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the Mizrahi was always holding the bag of the Mapai, so to speak, even though the names were different. And they didn't use the power that they could have used, at least this is what the Agudah felt, to advance the religious agenda more. But rather, they were comfortable in a movement that was creating a state, little by little, in which religion is really assigned, as I say, a position low in the totem pole, not being of very great importance. And, of course, the Mizrahi was always criticizing the Agudah as just a bunch of carping critics with no program whatsoever for the suffering Jews of Europe and elsewhere. Here's the St. Louis that Roosevelt wouldn't let in. I know one picture says 1,000 words. Because I can't say 1,000 words tonight. No, but seriously, the Mizrahi Zaigas, and what's your program for Jews in Poland? What's your program for Jews in Lithuania? The only thing the Agudah can say is, well, the heart of the enemy getting in even your way. But the Zionist says, at least we're trying. And so hence you had these kind of clashes all the way through this pre-state period. The rabbinate in this country, the synagogue rabbinate, and even the Shtat Rabbanis, the big Rabbanim of America, the Agudas Rabbanim, were all Mizrahi, almost all of them. Here's Rabbi Leventhal from Philadelphia, Rabbi Rosenberg. I know these names aren't household words, see, but they were once. Right? Let me put it this way: when Rabbi Weinberg and Rebbetzin Weinberg got married, who was the Mesader Kedushin? He was. He said, well, Rabbi Rosenberg is the head of the Agudas Rabbanim. He's also the president of Mizrahi. You understand? Rabbi Konvitz in New Jersey, and Rabbi Schwartz, of course, we all know, in Baltimore. So it's not what people think. The Thalik is, he's a Mizrahi, must have a kippah sruga, and he, must have this in the profile. As I said before, many big rabbis, especially when you had this community behind you, and the community is very Zionist, and the public doesn't want to hear, ideological chalukim, like you read in a partisan newspaper, in a theological newspaper. They want to know, what are we doing to help the Jews in Israel? How are we sending more people there? We another cow and another house and all that kind of business. So the Rabbanim were all on the program over there. And the rabbis I'm talking about were the leading rabbis in America until around 48. I mean, that's when everything starts to change, in the late 40s. Here's a clip I showed you once before of the March in Washington in Roosevelt's time. Again, the 400 rabbis go to Washington, and I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. But almost all the big speakers, including the guy who's giving the actual speech, Rabbi Zev Gold, were the big machers in the Mizrahi movement in the United States and around the world. Rabbi Gold later was a Chaver Knesset. They called Machon Gold after him. You see? So here, take a look at this. Now, many are in the Agudah, but many aren't. So it'll take a minute. 43. Here's Rabbi Rosenberg, Leventhal, Rabbi Gold.
America. Amen.
That's Rabbi Lezer Silver from Cincinnati, who was a member of the Agudah and the Mizrahi. You had a lot of that also. So I'm trying to show you a little bit of the infrastructure at the time I'm going to be speaking of, or up to it anyway. In Palestine itself, the Mizrahi had a full program of building kibbutzim, and they were like weak sisters compared to the Mapai, but they parallel. If they'll build a high school here, they'll try to build a mamlachti, a religious Zionist high school there. If they have a kibbutz here, then they'll try to build a religious one over there, like Tiratzvi or something like that, and so forth across the board. The one thing the Mizrahi does not do is, and this was their big error, build yeshivas. They did everything but that. But that's the one thing that's the perpetuator. You understand? You can count on the fingers of one finger. No. Oh yeah. This is a good. This is their building kibbutz Etzion. This is Mizrahi. Some have yarmulkes and stuff. Some don't. If you look closely, you can see there. This was a publicity little piece that they did. Building overnight a settlement, and it's totally part of the pre-1948 Israeli reality, shall we say, in which you have these kind of kibbutzim and Moshe Hoda and those kind, and this community and that community, and you see what, and men and women, So this is very typical of that time. All right, let's go to the next one. Rabbi Neria was the only person, as far as I'm aware, who in the Mizrahi movement said, we better do something about it. The Agudah is building all the yeshivas. And therefore all the kids are going to go there, and they're going to change our children. And so he started Kfar HaRoeh and all, but it didn't get off the ground. You didn't get to the KBY period, if I can call that, till well into the 50s. And so the pre-state period was one in which the Mizrahi had a lot of institutions, but they didn't have the one that we know from experience now was the biggie. And also, Mizrahi had a strong left wing, socially and theologically and otherwise. Professor Cassuto, a very famous Bible critic, was this big member of the Mizrahi movement. You understand? He had been chief rabbi in Florence beforehand. But in America, that would be called conservative. And I'm serious. And what do I mean when I say conservative? Because he's a very famous Bible critic. In other words, he doesn't believe the Torah comes from Moshe either. You see? No. He has his own theories about that I won't get into. But that's okay in the Mizrahi. No, you couldn't conceive of that in the Agudah, is what I'm trying to say. The problem is, for the Mizrahi, all the leading Litvish Gedolim in Europe were Agudah, or just about them. And these are the big names. Right? The Chavetz Chaim, Reb Chaim Beiser, and Reb Chana Wasserman, and people like that were very strongly the Agudah, and very anti the Mizrahi, by the way. I mean, they really didn't like it because they see themselves. Whatever. Don't worry about that. I'll ask Rabbi Oberstein to come up and switch the slides. And by the way, wait a second. These people, there's the Chavetz Chaim and there's Reb Chana, these people were the moderates. Right? They're the moderates. Let's go to the next one. That's Munkach. Munkach in Czechoslovakia. That's the Minchas HaLazar. Now, I mean, I've said it before, but I'm sure some of you at least remember, the Munkach Rebbe was like Satmar. In other words, to him, the Agudah was a dangerous left-wing movement. You see? Now, he meant it. And the reason is, because from his point of view, they're selling out just like the Mizrahi is, by cooperating with the Zionists, living in Palestine with them, and, all that sort of thing. So why am I going through all this background? Because all three of these trends will manifest themselves in Israel in 1949 to 1952. The there was a Gucci Aliyah, as I always call it, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, in which case the religious immigrants, and certainly the Haredi types, had very difficulty getting certificates to allow in. The way Ben Gurion and the others set it up already in the 20s was the party schlüssel, which means, numerous clauses. If you have 30% of the vote in the Zionist elections, you get 30% of the certificates. You bring in your own people. If this one got 5% of the vote, they get 5%. And now each party's able to bring in immigrants from Germany and from Poland and Romania, wherever you want to go, who are affiliated with your party. That means that the immigration to Israel in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, when it was under Palestine, under the British, was very eugenic and highly tailored. I mean, there was no mass aliyah. You had to have acceptance from the big, the party organization that counted. If you were from and you want to have a good chance of getting into Palestine in the 20s or 30s, join the Mizrahi. Let's put it this way. If you identify, for example, as an Aguda, they give you very little, because why should they give you? You're not even participating in the Zionist elections, not part of the Knesset over there, in the pre-state Knesset. Well, I call this a eugenic policy, because and I mean it, because they were out to create a certain type of Jewish community. This goes back to Hanuman and the others, but it's a fact. And, in the long run, Hitler killed everybody, so it's almost like it's sad to review the whole chapter. But it means that the Jewish community, the Yishuv in Palestine, is not going to be your typical community. It's going to have a very specific type of profile. Ben Gurion is comfortable with a marginal religious party position in the new state, especially since the Mizrahi always backed him ever since the 1930s on non-religious matters. It would be more like a Eastern European Kehillah, as I told you before. And here's the iconic picture of it. Now, because he was the head of Mizrahi, of course, and they were close. Ben Gurion didn't have friends, but they were close. No, he didn't. In the yeshuv I'm talking about, in the Knesset that I'm speaking about before 48, there are no Haredim, there are no communists, and no Arabs. Because the Arabs aren't going to vote in the yeshuv Knesset when it's under the British. The communists don't recognize Zionism any more than the Aguda does. So it actually works to the benefit of the Zionists, because these guys aren't even, we don't have to worry about their votes, because they're not part of the team. They're not part of the game. In the new state, after May 1448, they're all in the Knesset now. When Israel has its first elections and afterwards, the Arabs can vote. We talked about this. When Israel has its first elections now, excuse me, the communists can vote, and they do, as we pointed it out. And in the new state, Knesset, the Haredim can vote and will vote, except for the Torah Karta. So there's Rabbi Amram Blau when he was still young. He, of course, is leading the Torah Karta, who, following like the Munkach Rebbe, will say that the whole Aguda movement is a sellout. And the reason is, they say that is because the Aguda, up till 1948, was in principle opposed to the establishment of the State of Israel. This is what happened. As late as 47, they said, we're Bashita, opposed to establishment of Israel by these guys. Now, if you want to have a totally frum state, well, none of which was up for discussion, then maybe we'll revisit the question, because then it breaks down to are you Satmar or not. But that wasn't even up for discussion. However, they, wake up and smell the coffee, so to speak, and by 46, 47, they're already in secret negotiations with Ben Gurion, because they say a Jewish state is going to happen, and we got to locate ourselves within this framework. Do they consider themselves Israeli patriots, all the rest of it? It's more like dealing with the Tsarist government. You have to find out who's in charge and make the best deal you can with them, which is what minorities do all the time. So they're going to be acting as a minority in Israel. They're going to modify the stand. They're going to sign the Declaration of Independence, several of them. And they joined together with the Mizrahi Party for the first elections in 1948, 49. They called it the Chazit Datit, the religious front. And they served in Ben Gurion's government. Here's the leader of the Aguda party in the Knesset, Reb Levin, who was the brother-in-law to Ger Rebbe, and also a grandson of the Chedushi Rim and all that. And he had served as the Haredi representative under the Polacks, and then when the Germans were there, and now he's in Israel, in Tel Aviv. You see? And he's a very seasoned statesman, you might say. And they cut a deal. And he serves as the minister of welfare from 48 to 52 in Ben-Gurion's government. And so to the Torah Karta, that's a betrayal. Now, I pointed out last week or whenever it was, both the Aguda and the Mizrahi, therefore, are the ones who maintained Ben-Gurion in power, especially in the early years. But each used its power for different ends. The Mizrahi, because of their general profile, was interested in state sponsorship of religion. Shabbos and Yom Tov becoming official rest days, all the open food in the army and government installations must be kosher. Shimi Gardner last year around this time in Tel Aviv, and we finally found some place, there was a kosher restaurant, and they said, oh, if you would have been here 5 minutes ago, you would have seen General Dempsey and who's the Israeli now? Gantz, is that it? The Israeli chief of staff. I said, what are they doing that? General Dempsey, I got that right? General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because he was an official visit to Israel, and they were in the Tel Aviv area, and by regulations, it has to be a kosher restaurant. If you're having them for a private dinner, you can do what you want. But if he's the chief of the staff, the Ramat Kal of the Israeli army, and it's an official Tzahal function, has to have a hechsher. It has to have a decent hechsher too. That's what the guy said. So these are all things that the Mizrahi won in their bargaining, and they pushed for in Israel. There's to get a law prohibiting raising pigs. Kid you not. And most importantly, the Mizrahi fights for and gets religious control over marriage and divorce. It's actually interesting that Ben-Gurion and the Mapai, and these were committed socialists in many regards, were comfortable with this amount of kfiyat datit, as we call it today. And that's a tale in itself, because the people in the regime and the people in Palestine in general, I'm talking about, with all this Gucci Aliyah stuff, yes, most of them had rejected religion and switched to their own form of secular Zionism, but they all grew up in a home with a Bubby and a Zaidi. Ben-Gurion even used these terms, and Moshe Dayan, people like use the term. He said, these people look like our grandparents. And that emotional connection there, remember, there's no Reform Judaism. You're just religious or you're not religious. So if you're not religious, that doesn't mean that you don't have some kind of a tie, whether you want to admit it or not, to the world of traditionalism. And it's just deeply ingrained in them that, yes, if you have a Jewish community, obviously, the marriage and divorce is something the rabbis take care of. I mean, how to go in Vilna, how to go in Kovna, how to go in anywhere else. For major things, the regular parties take over. If it's for the cemetery or the mikvah or marriage or you get divorced or whatever, then you go to the Beis Din, you see? And so this carries itself over in political deals hammered out in 1947 and 48. And it's really quite remarkable, because the religious parties in 49 to 52 and afterwards will get a lot of what we would call today Sharia law legislation passed by the Knesset. I mean, there's all kind of laws about you can't do this on Shabbos and that kind of thing on Shabbos. And if somebody has a store open, they get penalized. And the Mizrahi will form Shabbos committees after the state is formed in every community to watch which store is cheating. And they'll tell the police. The police don't want to do anything about it, but then they get an order from the top. The law says you have to do something about it. And it's creating the crazy Israeli reality with which we're familiar today. The Mapam party hates this. Oh my goodness, they say that we want a state which is secular, and therefore maybe Saturday can be a rest day, but marriage and divorce should be civil, like in France. All matters of personal status and anything like that should be totally left up to the individual, the way we do it in the United States of America. You see? It could be, this one of the reasons was, this one way of Ben-Gurion keeping the parties apart. There's him with Rav Maimon, who's whispering in his ear, and Maimon, and the ones after him are the ones who got him, Ben-Gurion, people, to sign on and pass all these laws, which really are quite remarkable. Think about this. Israel, I use the word Sharia law, but it's kind of true. Israel regards itself as a Western country. And it is sort of. And the reason I say sort of is, there's no Western country that would tolerate a situation in which you can't get a divorce unless it goes through Orthodox rabbinical thing. There's no Western country, in which you say, if a boy and a girl love each other, want to get married, it's just not possible for them to get married. Because, if a boy and a girl want to get married, and one's a Kohen and one's a divorcee or something like that, or Gioris, it's just not possible to get married. And you say, in Maryland, for crying out loud, they passed a gay marriage law. The idea is that this is your own personal autonomy question. This is up to what you want to do. The state is just there to register the marriages and the divorce and all that. But the state's not going to tell you what to do. And in Israel, thanks to Mapayniks, as well as these religious parties, no, you can't get married. That's all. Too bad. It won't happen. She can't get divorced. There's a lot of problems we know with that with the Agunas, because it's too bad. And it's 65 years now, and Israel regards itself as having a Chiloni majority, and yet Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sharett, and all the others were comfortable in 1948 with passing a legal regime in which they said, all right, if you're the wrong type of boy and wrong type of girl, you can't get married. It's just very interesting. Israel's the anomaly because the only Western democracy, therefore, with religious coercion. We know this. And they keep talking forever about changing, but they never have. This is an example, as I said before, of Israel being a totalitarian democracy, as the famous book by Professor Talmon in 1952 put it, because it's democratic in that you elect the government, but then the government can do all these dictatorial kind of things. The average Israeli, I bet you, didn't like the idea that if you can't get married, then tough luck. Or am I wrong? Or does the average Israeli not really care that much about this and was perfectly willing to live with this amount of kfiyah that there's the fascinating question. The Mizrahi also wants and gets a government-sponsored rabbanut. Notice literally the reverse of the separation of church and state. So you have it in America. Ben-Gurion, this wasn't even a fight for him. Rabbi Herzog was the chief rabbi at that time, and under the Israeli state law, they pass laws in which every city has a rabbanut, and that's a matter of funding. And religious councils and a whole infrastructure is created, the like of which is you're not going to find, obviously, in an American-type situation. Here are the numbers with the Mapai always getting in the mid-40s, and Ben-Gurion was very clever. One of the reasons he does this is if he passes all these kind of religious laws, and the Mapam screams about them, we can't see it so well, here's the Mapam, screams about them, then the religious parties are going to be driven into the arms of Ben-Gurion. You understand? Because he says, I'm the only guy you can get a deal with. If these guys ever take over, they're going to close down everything for you, which was true. So he used it as a wedge to among the opposition parties, because his great fear is if you get 19 of this and 16 of this, you're already getting close to 60. You get another 2-3 parties in there, you could replace the Mapai. Oh no, that'll never happen. Because, you understand? That'll never happen. Because the religious parties and the Mamam, it's fire and water. So politics is, as we all know, is very strange. But as I said before, can we go to the next thing over here? Yeah, that's it. Here's Rav Herzog. I just wanted to show you.
Rabbi Herzog meant when he said, "Upon the present strife and tension, storm and threat rises from Jerusalem the prophetic summons for peace, or shalom, which in Hebrew language is one of the names of God. There is no basic conflict that exists between us and our neighbors, and there is no reason why we should not renew that cooperation, spiritual, philosophical, cultural."
Chief Rabbi Herzog. Yes.
And the Arabs of the Middle Ages.
Yeah. That's enough. We can. Yeah. That's it. Now, I showed you a clip of this before. What I'm trying to say is like this. He's a chief rabbi. It's like a pope. And to be perfectly honest, the Jewish religion doesn't exactly know such a thing. But the Mizrahi said that, you do have Archbishop of Canterbury in other countries, so we should have a somewhat similar setup in Israel. And the Mapai goes along with it. I'm trying to tell you. The Rav Herzog was very distinguished, obviously. He's not your typical rabbi, but nevertheless, you have Dayanim, the rabbinical Supreme Court, and the district courts, and all that. And all this is passed in parliamentary votes by a government, the decisive majority of which don't believe in God, or at least say they don't. So under Mapai now, the state often cheats on its promises to the Mizrahi. That's one of the ways they operated. But like a naughty child, always promises to do better. And so, I mean, it's really crazy what I'm about to tell you, but Israel in 49 to 52 has some tough times. They got to deal with the Arabs. They got to deal with the UN. You got the zillion Olim coming in. The economy's crashing. And there was a flood actually in 49. They had all kind of problems. What is the people have studied this? What is the most discussed subject in the Knesset in 49, 50, 51, and 52? The answer is Shabbos. You understand? Because the religious party complaining about this, or some Chiloni guys complaining about that, and why are they making a new law that you can't have the buses run in this place or not? And Ben Gurion has to answer questions all the time in Parliament. Are you aware that a certain soldier was seen eating treif on the army, base? And it's kind of business. And you wonder, was this what the whole country had as its main priority or preoccupation? And the answer is yes and no. As I tried to show you last time, sometimes if you focus on one thing, it obscures the others. They spent a lot of time arguing over questions of religion, but it means they gave Ben Gurion a free hand in everything else. And that's what he was looking for. The Mizrahi also wants and gets funding for its own separate school system, which means that, as you know, today they call it Mamlachti Dati. That means a fully free, taxpayer-paid system of K through 12, as we would say. Everywhere being in a parallel to the existing schools. This actually brings up the all-important hornet's nest of public education in Israel, because already in the 30s and 20s, you already had the phenomenon, which is just an early 20th century Jewish thing, of multiple and parallel school systems. In Eastern Europe, you had this, particularly after the First World War. In Eretz Yisrael, you certainly had that. You probably don't know what I'm talking about. Without going through the details, if you lived in Lithuania or you lived in Poland, or Hungary, whatever, in the 20s and the 30s, let's say, what school do you send your kids to? There's a dozen. There's 2 dozen. Do you want the socialist school to teach it this way? You want the Yiddish school to teach it this way? Do you want the socialist Zionist school to teach this way? Do you want the bourgeois Zionist school to teach this way? Do you want the Mizrahi type, school? Do you want an Aguda, as we would say, type school system? You want none of the above? Do you just want to send your kids to a Polish public school? The school systems were part of the attempt to mass indoctrinate, a large following, so that they would continue to exist as entities, as parties. This was all schlepped right into Israel, and really from the 1920s on, in all the Jewish places, in Tel Aviv, obviously, and Haifa, and Yerushalayim, and Chova, and elsewhere, there's this type of school out there, and there's that type of school, and the British didn't care. They didn't even fund education, so really it was, dealer's choice. But now Israel's becoming a state, and one of the first laws they passed over is education law, like any civilized state. And Israel's committed to public schooling, which is what any normal Western country does. Right? Free public schooling. You want an educated citizenry. Which school is going to get the money? Now, which is going to be the Israeli school system? Now, if people like Ben Gurion and others had their way, they say like this: public schools, and there were many who argue for this, public schools should be a completely secular thing like in the United States. And religious schools can also operate, but on your own dime. That's what we do in America, for example. That's often the case around the world. But that's not good enough, because if you have parents who will be Olim and others coming in, they'll have a free public school, and then the religious school system will cost money. You know where they're going to go. And so, as I say before, even though there were parallel sets of school systems in Palestine up to 48, the situation gets real dicey after Israel's become a state. Israel had 4 systems operating at the same time. One was the general Zionist schools, the general Zionist part, the bourgeois schools. They get the best secular education. You understand? If you want your kid to get a degree or something like that, you send them to this school in Yerushalayim or that school or in Tel Aviv, and religion will be in there a little bit, but it's really fundamentally secular, and in principle secular. They teach the Bible's a storybook, but they're good in English, math, science, and social studies, as they say. The Mizrahi schools are parallel to all this, but the Mizrahi have schools. They don't have any yeshivas, yeshivot. The Mizrahi schools are co-ed. This is deliberate. They deliberately parallel the secular system. The Mizrahi schools we characterize by, what should I say, a weak, let me think how to phrase this, a weak Gemara type program. You understand? A weak Limudi Kodesh, as we would say there. If you can still around, you get these old textbooks that are used in the school over there. It's very heavy with Bialik and Chernichovsky and other famous poets of the past. And you don't have to be totally religious to get into their curriculum. And the idea was that they were appealing to a certain type of mass who wanted to be like the others, just religious. You see? Well, this sort of works, but it's also not going to be a turn on to a parent who cares about a very strong, what we would call today, very strong Torah type education. But the Mizrahi gets the money to build up their system. The Aguda schools, there the goal is no secular studies for boys, as you know, if they can help it. The Aguda really is in, when I use the word Aguda sort of like iconically today, you know, it's a shorthand. When I speak about the Aguda, there are basically two groups in Palestine. The Litvish yeshivas on the one hand, and the Hasidim on the other hand. The big Rebbes at that time, the Belzer Rebbe, who escaped the Holocaust and came to Tel Aviv in the war, and the Ger Rebbe also was able to escape in 1940, get to Palestine, and they immediately started building up their business, you know, and organizing their followers to the best they can. And the establishment of Israel actually was a big help to them, because now you don't have to worry about certificates or anything. Anybody can come to Israel anytime they want. It's an old Jewish country, and you know, it's going to be a boost for both of these. No one figured, I don't think, that when Israel became a state in 1948, that's going to lead to a Haredi explosion in population and in influence, but that's what happens. The Litvish yeshivas, coincidentally, if I can use that term, happened to be right then in the wake of the Second World War, entering a new and the decisive phase of development in which they will own Orthodox Judaism. I've spoken about this in the past, but very briefly, you know, there used to be regular, what you call, I'm using it to Orthodox, traditional Judaism. The old Jews, you know, you keep Shabbos and you do whatever you do. That's number one. And, excuse me. There used to be the old kind of Judaism. And then there were yeshivas. Yeshivas were where boys went to learn, or didn't. And the two are often, separate, it's very interesting, separate places for doing Judaism. But we have it, for example, in Baltimore, roughly today, even in a very yeshivish town. You can daven in this shul and do all that and live your life in that way. You can go to yeshiva and live over there and live life that way. Both options are open. In the time I'm talking about, the old shul-centered Judaism, the old traditionalism of the grandparents, was in decadence. If we think back what was considered a modern Orthodox shul, or a typical Orthodox shul in Baltimore, for example, 70 years ago, nobody shomer Shabbos. Hardly. You know what I'm talking about. And this was a phenomenon not only in America, but in Palestine and elsewhere. And what it meant was that by the time you finished the Second World War, the old-fashioned orthodoxy, the tradition as they call it, was perceived by the upcoming young generation as being in a state of decadence. And so the young will respond to it by moving to the right. I'm talking about the ones who care and are committed. This is just a world phenomenon that was happening in the wake of the Holocaust. And you know, there's an hour to speak about that, which we don't have. Just at that very moment, the state of Israel is born. At that particular moment. The result is, as you'll see, that the yeshivas will own Orthodox Judaism of the non-Hasidic variety. Because any young person who wants to know where you do Judaism correctly can't go to a shul. They don't do it correctly over there. He can't really look to his parents very often. Actually, not even the grandparents. You know what I'm saying? There's only one place where they do Pesach right. There's only one place where they do Shabbos right. And if you're passionate about that to any degree, you're going to go to the yeshiva. And when you leave there, you're going to carry those values with you. And so, whereas You know, in the old days, this was okay in an Orthodox community. Now it won't be. Whereas in those days, the standards were quite moderate. Now they're not good enough. You see what I'm saying? This all starts in the late 40s anyway. And so the establishment of a state of Israel, which is going to end up giving money to fund these kinds of yeshivas, or the elementary schools that are feed them in the beginning, is of vast importance in the creation of a sociological new reality. There's a decline in the rabbinate after the Second World War, and certainly in the period I'm talking about, because the rabbis have to make compromises. They're sellouts. Here we go over and over again to that idea. And there's a concomitant rise in the position of the Rosh Hashiva. So it used to be the rabbis were big deal. Look at that picture that I showed you before with the rabbis marching in Washington. That was the last hurrah. Those were but they were all older. Those were the Rabbonim of the Agudas Rabbonim type. This one was the Rav in Baltimore, and this one was the Rav in Boston, this one was the Rav of the community in Philadelphia. Their own kids didn't follow in their path. And so you can't say, I'm going to live in Baltimore, just keep up what they were doing until then. They didn't have they built on sand. Whoever's coming after them, if they care about Judaism whatsoever, they're going to go to Ner Israel, to the Tarvadas, to Chaim Berlin, and those kind of places to learn how to do it. You're not going to do the Seder the way your parents did it because your parents didn't know what they're doing. You know, that's the attitude over there. The yeshiva is the sole institution, therefore, of authentic Judaism. That's what emerges if you're not Hasidic. Regular traditionalism is contemptible. And in Israel, the new state of Israel, the Litvish yeshivas have that most important thing, which is a charismatic face. A genuine gadol. I'm talking about the Chazon Ish, of course. Right? I mean, this is, if they're ever an iconic figure, because the Chazon Ish was the person who expressed the ideology of the yeshiva movement and the idea that everything I just told you should be, that you should abandon the old traditionalistic type of ways and do what they call the Shir Chazon Ish. And in other words, and make it according to the purer and more essential form of Judaism, such as is found in the Torah literature. And listen, the Chazon Ish was a gadol. I mean, what did he do for a living? He wasn't a rabbi. He wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva. What did he do for a living? He had a card that says Chazon Ish gadol. No, I mean, no, you know what I'm saying. Notice he was a totally charismatic figure. I'm sure many of you know this. The Chazon Ish was from Lithuania, but he was a Nister. You know, he tried to stay incognito for a long time, just learn all day, and then he finally moved to Israel. Didn't have any children. They moved to Israel in the 30s, and it took about a decade for his charisma to get traction. But when it did, it did. You understand? He comes to the mid-30s, and he's not a smiley guy and walking around and Hebreman and that sort of thing. Quite the opposite. Very much a withdrawn figure, sitting and learning in Bnei Brak. I think he almost never went to Yerushalayim. And it's the classic model of the rabbinic charisma. He becomes a gadol. Who made him a gadol? He's a gadol. And he was. You understand? And by the time you get to the mid-40s, you can't challenge the Shir the Chazon Ish. Rabbi Chaim Noah did it, and they verbally beat him up. No, these are famous things. And that means that you have a new movement, a Litvish yeshiva movement starting, the decadence of the old rabbinate, a model figure, really a model figure to everybody can aspire to. And he's saying it should be Torah 24/7 and nothing but. There certainly should be any secular studies. And now, by the way, he's a gadol. On a one-to-one individual basis, people came to talk to him, and he gave a heter. He wasn't a rigid person or anything like this, quite the opposite. But as a matter of broad policy, he's quite strong. It's a black hat, not a gray hat. I mean, he says, the Hasidim are right in a lot of things. And their dress, and their super tznius, and all the rest of it, we have to emulate them. It's most unusual for a Litvish gadol to talk like that, but he becomes the man. You also have, starting in the 40s, the emergence of what you could call the Rosh Yeshiva, the rock star. And I'm talking about the Ponevezher Rav, okay, which I was just able to get a clip about. I think there's still some people that remember him, but he wasn't just another, he was a rabbi in Lithuania, in Ponevezh, obviously, and he was extremely talented as an organizer and builder. He had just purchased for his yeshiva in Panovich a campus to give you it's 1.5 the sizes of Northwestern High School. So with a nice piece of thing there, right? And he goes, this is going to be for a girls' school, and this is going to be for the boys' school, this is the yeshiva and all the rest of it. And he went around the world, as I'm sure many people know, already in the 20s, raising money, and he was very charismatic. So the real charisma is you give him the money and you still like him. You understand? So he built, it's interesting, he built a fan base of people who gave him money. Usually it's the other way around. The point is that, and he's very aguda, and he's also right-wing aguda, so very anti-Zionist ideologically. He did his best to prevent any kind of Zionist thing in being in Panovich. I mean, in the city. He was the rabbi of the city, Dav Basin. He was the rabbi of Panovich, and he was also created his own yeshiva from the bottom up through his own fundraising. And then all got killed by the Germans. And he was the only one who survived for a certain reason. And he comes to Israel, he's all broken, but then, after he was depressed for a year, but after he got out of it, then he said, well, we got to, pick up where we left off. And here, look at this little video over here. I'll explain. This is this is in Panovich in Lithuania. Some American guy came with a movie camera. That's the Panovich when he was young. Yes, they're performing for the camera, you understand. Right? But he's saying over to the boys, seeing they're sitting outside. They all have hats like they used to do in Lithuania when you learn. Okay? And I think you can tell just by looking, what a charmer, he was once upon a time. And then, keep going. Yeah, the Panovich made a video. This is him by the time he came to Israel. Let's keep the sound off. That's right, yeah. This is Panovich with his architect and his lawyer. I mean, they're down to business over here. That was what he did. He says, we got to rebuild. I got to find the land. Got to get the money. Got to get all the legal stuff taken care of. Got to get the, what do you call it? The accountants on board. And one guy's Schuster, one guy's the architect, the other guy's the builder, He threw himself into a frenzy of building, and he built up Bnei Brak, as you know. And my point is like this. I say, as a rock star, he was a very popular person charismatically. People just fell for the charm in Israel as well as in Chutz La'aretz. And you asked whether he was opposed to Zionism. He said, here's the point I want to get to. He was 100% opposed to Zionism, but in the ideological way. What you're saying is right. Ideologically, he was very opposed to Zionism because they used the word Zionism as cultural Zionism. And that means that you want to get rid of religion and replace it with a different type of Judaism. Of course he's totally opposed to that. But that doesn't mean he's opposed to Israel. Right? He sees the possibilities they have there, and he was a very smart person. I need to say that. He says he's a very smart person, and he saw, people are complex, and people that you matter to consider are not religious. You press the right buttons, and they are religious. If you know how to appeal to people, I'm not talking in terms of money, I'm talking about across the board. He discerned, I think, a lot of the things I'm talking about over here, which is that there are great possibilities in the new state. Okay? And, you used to get off the plane and say, Jewish state, Jewish police, this is wonderful. Now, but that's a good question that you ask. The Chazon Ish certainly was very strongly ideologically anti-Zionist. He was by no means comfortable with the establishment of the state of Israel. But once it's there, or whether we're going to have the Arabs come in, and so he and the Panovich Rav basically said like this: let's just be sectorial. Let's concentrate on building up our own institutions. The Chazon Ish was shocked that Ben Gurion didn't close down all these shuls and all these yeshivas. He saw, when the Zionists come in, it's going to be all over. He said, you have to say Tillim every day that this is not happening. And after a little while, I think they came to see it's actually the other way around. That if you know how to work this system, which is the way any political democratic system in the world works, if you know how to work this system, you can get things. And, they simply adopt the wisdom of the fox and the hedgehog, way back when the Greek philosopher said, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one great thing. And so I told you last week, they give Ben Gurion a free hand in everything except chinuch. That's right. Because they know one great thing. You get the chinuch and then you'll get everything else in the end. And so what happens is, you understand what I'm saying? It's about chinuch stupid. The only thing that matters is educational institutions. Will there be Beis Yaakovs and day schools and things like this? And will they be government supported? And will the government allow them to operate over there? The Aguda gets its own state school system. They do get government funding for the dissemination of Haredi Judaism, and here's the guy that did it. You know, it's kind of funny. He created what I'm sure from his point of view should have been a monster, because starting in '49, for the Hasidim as well, for the first time ever in history, you're talking about getting large sums of money on a steady basis from the government. But that didn't happen in Poland ever. That never happened in Lithuania. Never happened in Germany. In Inquisition, in Spain and all. I mean, that, of course, none of that ever happened. A government is a government. Government's got real money. You're not talking about nickel and dimes anymore. And you can't run a school system with hundreds of schools and the teachers and the students and all the rest of it unless you're talking millions. And Israel commits to doing that as part of the coalition and agreement, because they, in return, we give you a free hand, like I say, in all the other things. But we're interested in one area over there. And the Beis Yaakov movement, therefore, for the first time gets real in Israel. And with the most extraordinary results. There's a famous guy, Friedman, who wrote wrote many articles on the subject. But the most important one for our purposes tonight is, think about the following, what I'm about to tell you. The yeshiva system, especially the whole Haredi system, now the big thing is the kollel. Right, that's where you have thousands of people, because school's only a few years. But then afterwards, if you're sitting and learning for a long time, they get masses of people. How you get a kollel? Well, he's learning, so where do you get the money? Where do you get the money? You know, if there's no funding, you got to go and get a job. The wife, wait a second. No, he says, listen, if you don't have any money, you're going to have to go get a job. But the wife can work as a teacher in the Beis Yaakov system. That's a job with the government. That's like getting a job with Social Security. It's benefits, it's pensions, the whole thing for the family. By agreeing to legitimate and pay for Beis Yaakov, they created an entire class of people who have a government job, an honorable job too, nothing wrong with being a 10th grade teacher, in the school job. They're the ones who are going to marry guys who go sit and learn. They're the ones who are that type. And so nobody knew it at the time, but starting around 1949, 1950, begins the rise of what we consider today the huge Haredi infrastructure, which the government funded. You see? So it's funny to think of it that way, but that's what happened. Israel is also a social welfare state. That's how they define themselves. They're socialists. Social welfare means you want to provide Social Security, unemployment insurance. If they have enough money, think about what I'm about to tell you. If you have enough money, they pay for total universal 24-hour daycare, if that's what you want. This is what they're committed to. This is all factors favoring the rise of these large frum communities. Right? You do get a lot. The Israeli government will have a natalist policy, which means they want to encourage births, and that's a child-friendly sort of thing. So you get extra money for having children. Nothing wrong with that. But again, who does this favor? Right? The people who are interested in having a lot of children. That's a matter of culture more than economics, but economics makes a big deal, is a big part of it. What do I mean when it's a part of culture? The easiest place in the world, theoretically, to have 20 children would be if you live in a kibbutz. Am I right or am I wrong? If that's what you want to do. Why? You know what I'm saying. The mother doesn't have to do anything, or she could do everything, or 50-50, or whatever you want. Correct? If she wants to see the kid all day long, they'll allow that. If you don't want to see the kid at all, they can allow that also. You want to see the kid, raised by others, you can. But the kibbutz has like one child a family, maybe two. No, I'm saying it's a matter of culture. The kibbutzim, so to speak, do not benefit from the natalist policy. But a Hasidic family in Bnei Brak does, you see? And they couldn't make it without it. And this wasn't the reason the Mapai and the Mapam too, wanted to set up a social welfare state, but that's, that's how it works out. They get also, as you know, in the 49, draft exemptions for the yeshiva students. Here's the young Shimon Peres, look at he was at that time. And he was Ben-Gurion's Mankal Director General of the defense ministry. And Ben Gurion says, work it out to deal with them, because the Rashivas were saying that there are very small numbers of boys in yeshiva at that time, and if they go in the army, they might get killed. And this is a national treasure, because there was all the yeshivas were killed in World War II, and this is not something you want to. And Ben Gurion totally heard it. He said, I hear what you're saying. He wasn't interested in going to yeshiva, and he didn't think of it as a mass movement, and wasn't something that he thought would have any kind of appeal. But he understood the argument, sort of like Fahrenheit 451. We need a number of people to retain the tradition. This is very much the Eastern European sort of thing, which is, I don't keep Shabbos, you keep Shabbos for the rest of us. But that's a Madrega too. You understand? That's a Madrega too. You take your Shabbos. And this became part of the Israeli culture. I'll guard the borders, and you take care of the Shabbos. If they would only respect each other. I understand. So the Haredim, as they're called now, will primarily be interested in their Dalet Amos, what affects them personally. As I said before, the government does not fall. They raise hell, but the government doesn't fall. How should I put it? For all the religious scandals that happened in 1949 to 1952. When they come and pull the payers off of people, that doesn't lead to the fall of the government. When they mess over all these thousands of immigrants who come from Sephardi countries and de-religionize them, that doesn't cause the fall of the government. When they do things to the Yemenites, that doesn't lead to the fall of the government. When they pull the money for the schools, that's when Ben Gurion's government falls. You understand? Because that's the essential part of here. So what I'm trying to say is that they're the ones keeping the government in power. They're getting their particular concessions for it. And at the same time, whether they like it or not, they're becoming part of the Israeli reality. The Mizrahi obviously was part of the Israeli reality. They're also going to become the Israeli reality of the boat, appealing and pandering and all the rest of it. I'm going to show you a piece now from Salah that you'll like, where, let me just set up for a second, and that is that he wants to get a shikun, he can't get the house, he needs money, then elections come, and he says, so the different parties will try to bribe him. So what you'll see is, this is what I want you to pay attention to. What you'll see is that first, the Mapai are the guys that take him up, and they said, they'll show him that they're building housing for him, and that's the Mapai according to their party in power. But then he comes back to the Mabra, because he doesn't understand the election system. So he'll be greeted, and he'll make deals the same to promise to vote for the Yekisha party, the Progressive Party. You'll see a lady, giving everybody a present, and you'll see him handling in the corner with guys with hats. You understand? And they're also bargaining and bribing all the rest of it. That's the Mizrahi. You understand? And that means that although they say, we don't like this system, we don't really recognize the state, all the rest of it, really you do when you're participating as part of the life there. Let's see here. That's the Mapai. Now comes the Mapam. That's the Mapam. That's the Mizrahi now. Now will come the general Zionists. That's the bourgeois party. See, they used to give out goodie bags. Election day. Election board. In the Middle East, you don't wink your eye. You can only use one, you know. I think the hour's late and I'm wiped out. I'm about 2/3 through what I wanted to do, but that'll have to wait for